What other advice would you give sales leaders? And then I'm going to follow up some about
Mhm.
cross sell because it's a big pain point. What other advice would you give a sales leader that, now here they are, right? They've been given the charge of you got a new company that's coming in, and here are the expectations from the board. You didn't have any say on what that was going to look like or the quotas or anything. What advice would you give the sales leader as he or she is taking on that new role?
Well, one is kind of role modeling, not becoming internally focused, right? And all this stuff is going on, people are worried about they have a job and so forth. Role modeling your discussions about the client first is extremely important because, as you mentioned, the politics and so forth. If the sales leader isn't role modeling that, a lot of stuff can internally, you start taking the eye off the ball. The second is, they're going to participate, but don't rush the comp plans and the territory planning, right? And then the third is just overall communication. Like we would have our sales lead, we'd give them extra money to physically get the sales reps together, right? Monthly basis initially, and then quarterly basis, and then it went back to normal. And that's an investment. Sales reps are coming flying in from all over the place. But that's just an opportunity to really communicate where you are, what's going on, a lot of Q&A, build the team stuff. So I would say make that an investment in getting your teams physically together to get to know each other.
I remember one global sales leader. We were doing an acquisition for the integration of the sales organization, and he went. I mean, it was a global company, multi-billion dollar, and he went into all the different locations. And he would wear a costume. It was really kind of funny. He dressed up as Big Bird for one, and nobody knew who was coming in, and it was their CRO. And he would walk in, and we would hear, about this after, but it really broke the ice and,
Hmm.
let them know a little bit about this person and his individual style. But, I'm not saying everybody has to wear a costume, but making that personal connection and getting out there, I would agree with you, is really key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also saw this one sales rep when he pulled this meeting together, he brought in
Yeah.
one of their top clients. And the client spoke about what it's like to be a client
Mhm,
Mm.
of Epic
mhm.
and
Oh,
what they like,
interesting.
their challenges are, like these multi-touch points. Sometimes they get a little confused, solution architect or sales rep, right? It was really interesting. It was a great idea. And you have to have a certain level of client relationship to have someone come in and be that honest. But I wish we had filmed that if we could, but that's just an example of a really good leadership move to, again,
Yep.
try to make things client centric and client focused and not get the internal consternation, swimming.
Yep. So I want to bring you back to cross sell for a minute, if I could,
Mhm.
because we do find it's one of the biggest challenges. And you know what? You're right. What we see day in and day out is we'll go in and we find out that the cross sell synergies or the cross sell expectations aren't there. And we can tell you for a fact, we know over 90% of companies that acquire another one, 90% of the cross sell expectations do not occur. We do know that in 90% of the cases. Um,
Mhm.
so you already discussed some of the mistakes that we've seen is, oh, they'll spiff it to death. We had one that was they were even giving a car. I mean, we have seen so much for just
I
so
have
many in a
too.
month, right? I'm sure you have seen a lot more
A
than
Porsche.
we have. So
We
it's
did a
huge.
Porsche. We leased a Porsche
See that?
for 2 years. Brought him down to Atlanta to drive in the Porsche track.
Oh my God. So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter, right? So
No.
I agree with you that a lot. Oh, and then I had another one. This would be more like a stick, but they didn't expect it to be a stick. So they want to cross sell and they had legacy products, but the solution was we're going to create a threshold to pay for everything. So you won't get upside or any decent pay on your core products until you hit a certain level of expectation on cross sell. Well, guess what? Their top performers they were blowing it out of the water with their, traditional products and services and weren't earning anything. and they started to leave. That was a
Mm,
panicked call that we
Right.
got that
Right.
one time. So when you think about that, and we realize the importance that salespeople have with their client, their relationships, their revenue, right?
mm.
What advice would you give sales leaders on first steps to take when they're thinking about cross sell?
Well, I think the more comfortable a sales rep is with the service offerings that they're supposed to cross sell and the people associated with those services,
Hmm.
the better off they are, right? Versus some marketing stick with some PowerPoints and so forth. I mean, having them understand if they're solution architects or pre-sales people in there, get them working with the sales reps and educating them on this and getting comfortable with the solution. So their perceived initial risk of what this could do to my existing revenue can be reduced, right? That
Mhm.
I found that to be fairly effective, not for all, but for many. That education of those other services that they want them to pull through. Because I think as senior executives, you see all these services and you kind of think, "Well, why aren't they doing this?" And then you go out and you speak to the rep and they don't really understand the service that well. And
Mhm.
that's what contributes to why they feel there's risk there. So that education, ongoing
Yeah.
education, not an event, but the ongoing education of these services and case studies that you can share and the wins that occur. Hey, Sally just sold this, and let's talk about how she did it and who. I think is very positive and can help the cause.
Yeah. To that point, Keith, Michelle, there was a recent situation where it was a client, there was an acquisition they had made. They were trying to get cross sell to happen.
Mhm.
And the core reps perceived that bringing in this other organization actually slowed down the sales process
Yeah.
and made it more complicated, when in fact it could accelerate it and it could make retention better, but it
Yeah.
was just a misperception. And communications was a big issue because they had unfortunately turnover in the sales organization. They had new people, so they weren't getting the same messaging as well.
That's one of the biggest challenges as you get larger. I mean, the things about when you're small, you're nimble and you
Right.
Yeah.
can make decisions quickly. But the larger you get, there's more layers of communication,
Mm.
there's more protocols. If you're public, there's more things. And that's the most difficult thing is how do you not lose what made you so successful, especially as a salesperson can get something approved like this versus having to go through your CFO and committee and it takes you, days, if not a week to get approval.
Yeah.
That has been probably one of the things I would always focus on and look for client feedback on this area as well. But that's one of the biggest challenges. How do you stay nimble, right? Balance the ability to be nimble versus the process that you have to have in place or processes when you get larger. And how
Mm.
do you balance those two is a challenge.
Yep.
And salespeople are at the end of that, right? It's-
Yeah.